Good afternoon. At Legends of Learning, we strive to be on the cutting edge of new game-based learning, or GBL, strategies and techniques, as well as bringing thought leaders together around student engagement. Today, we are here to do just that, to explore the latest innovations, current and projected trends, and solutions to the issues affecting our schools today. This collaborative conversation brings together some of the best and brightest minds in curriculum and instruction as we explore the successful implementation and subsequent impact of GBL in schools. As instructional time continues to be in flux in districts and schools due to all the issues we're facing today, the way STEM and innovative strategies are integrated into learning continues to need to evolve. Industry continues to encourage educators to think towards our students and our nation's economic future by building a foundation for STEM skills needed to thrive in our increasingly innovative and technologically sophisticated world. GBL is helping many districts in building these skills while developing the content understanding needed for success in their educational journey as well. With National Video Game Day just right around the corner on September 12th, there's no better time to learn from those who are using game-based learning to engage, inspire, and accelerate the learning of their students. Over 90% of students in our nation play video games. This medium should not be looked at as a vice anymore, but an opportunity to engage students in learning and meet them where they are. The latest research has shown that 80% of Americans believe that video games can be educational. And with almost 3 out of 4 parents playing games weekly with their kids, the stigma to using video games in schools is all but gone. At Legends of Learning, we look at the 7 F's of effective game-based learning to outline how this type of instruction can not only engage students, but develop STEM skills and the social emotional health of students while learning content. The 7 F's we look at are failure, which is really helping students understand that when we fail, we learn. Too often our students quit when they get something wrong or fail. Games are built in the essence of the player failing and having to learn as they progress. Fantasy, research on cognitive psychology tells us that we are 22 times more likely to remember content when it is wrapped in context. Fellowship, BYU researchers found teams experienced a 20% increase in productivity on tasks after playing video games together for just 45 minutes. Games can provide opportunities to learn how to collaborate. Feedback. Games give immediate feedback, which has been shown to have a significantly large increase in student performance than receiving delayed feedback as we have in the past. Fairness. In video games, we all start with a 0 score on level 1. Everyone has the same rules and the same pathways to success. Flow. Video games are intuitive and provide scaffolded experiences. If something is easy to students, they already know it. And freedom, giving students agency allows students to engage in deeper, richer learning and have true, quote, buy-in to developing understanding. I could share theory with you all morning for some of you or an afternoon for others and research and the best practices, but I know from being a former district science leader that you in the audience would rather hear from those who are implementing similar strategies. You know, the proof is in the pudding. Today, I'm joined by some incredible leaders in education from across the nation to dig into this specific topic, how to integrate meaningful activities tied to standard STEM skills that is engaging and impactful, deepening student understanding. As a panel, they will share some of the work they've been doing in their districts, and then we'll open the virtual floor, the chat box, if you will, for some of your questions. As I introduce each panelist, I'm going to ask them a very, very, very important question. With National Video Games Day here, what is your favorite video game? So I'll start with Dr. Tricia Nagel. She's the Director of Teaching and Learning at Joliet Public Schools in Illinois.
Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to discuss what my favorite computer game is. I enjoy strategy-based. I always have as a child and still to this day. Whenever I'm allowed to build a successful civilization, kingdom, or city, that's success for me.
I love it. I love it. I was a big Sid Meier's Civilization fan growing up, so I kindred spirits there. Dr. Rodney Culverhouse is here with us as well, and he's the secondary science supervisor at Newport News Public Schools in Virginia. Welcome.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me on the panel. I appreciate you allowing me to speak on game-based learning and share my favorite game. And mine kind of goes along with strategy-based, but not so much in building cities. I'm a secondary science supervisor, but I'm also endorsed in history because I've always had a fascination with it. So I'm into things like the Call of Duty, World at War type games, because a lot of them sequence actual events that happened in history. And so that part of it appeals to me a lot.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, those history games are becoming a way to really make an impact in not just education, but get kids interested in learning about what has happened in the past. I'm right there with you. Finally, we have Dr. Chris Shaban. He's the supervisor of 612 Science in Omaha Public Schools, Nebraska. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks, Jonathan. My favorite video game, it's going to date me a little bit. It was an Atari game called Chopper Command. So, you know, if for those of you who know what that is, you know how old I am now, and the fact that I'm still here involved in the conversation should be impressive.
Chris, no, I think that the whole thing is retro's back in right now. I keep on seeing all these ads on my screen for buying Nintendo Entertainment Systems and Ataris again. So, you know, I think Chopper Command is definitely the way to go.
If you stick with it long enough, right?
Exactly. If you want to feel failure, play an Atari game for a while and see what happens.
Right.
Well, with that said, we did have one other participant. Unfortunately, Jeff Hancock from Polk County, Florida, was unable to join us today. Just like us and many of you in the audience, as district leaders, sometimes we get pulled away for things. And unfortunately, he was not able to join, but he does send his best regards. And we'll make sure he's part of a panel in the near future here. So we're going to go ahead and jump right in, because this is not about me. This is about what you all are having and what all you all have been doing. So I'm going to actually start with Dr. Nagel. Your district has a track record for building towards the future of education. This year, many districts are continuing to use multiple types of instructional methods, including asynchronous learning. How do you see game-based learning being a part of the instruction solution for your students?
Thank you for inviting me to tell our game-based learning engagement story. We started off with game-based a few years ago in summer school, when we wanted to incorporate some supports to some practice to our standards for our problem-based learning. We do engineering design process for some of our summer school students where they have to build prototypes. So it was really important for us to find that digital piece that was engaging for them. It was flexible and engaging for them. So that's how we started off. Now, during the pandemic, you know, we were in remote learning all last year. It did push us then to think outside of summer school and innovate very quickly, not only for synchronous, but asynchronous learning. We had to think of our desired outcomes and how to focus that student attention online and how to have the students expand their understanding in that virtual environment. We know that there's multiple ways to engage students and encourage motivation, but we intentionally promoted student-centered strategies for professional learning while we were in remote, and also for our data team process. We embedded those features and made sure that our students were front and center. And so having the game-based practice and support some of the core pieces that we wanted in our outcomes just made it that much stronger in our engagement.
Fantastic. No, and Tricia, I think you hit on something very important, which is that whole engagement piece, especially last year when many districts were in, virtual virtual instructional world, the engagement of students. I have a second grader, and the very first year when she had to go Zoom, watching a first grader try to pay attention to hours and hours of Zoom just doesn't work. Thinking about how we're engaging kids and thinking about that, how it fits with building that instructional piece. Rodney and Chris, any things you'd like to add on that piece?
So I could pick up with my own children and watching a first grader as well, and a third grader try to navigate online learning, and that was a tough moment for sure. We really needed I felt like I needed my kids in front of teachers, and it highlighted the importance of teachers, right, for all of us. But the other side of that coin is with game-based learning. It's almost better now that our kids are having some more face-to-face time, that they can go back into a little bit of that screen time. It was nice to have some of these tools for sure through that transition, but I see a lot of more willingness to put in screen time by my own children. So just adding that to your comment, Jonathan.
And I'm coming on the same page, Chris. Obviously, there weren't many options other than screen time for the last year plus. But our district, at a secondary level, we only had a couple of schools out of 16 that had a one-to-one initiative. And when the pandemic hit, all of our schools went one-to-one. And so our teachers were able to learn a more effective way to use the technology. So now that we're in person and we have the technology skills, it's a perfect environment for blended learning. So now you have, another whole area of learning that hasn't really been able to be used before, because you'd have to reserve a computer lab or a computer card or whatever. And those were always sketchy when you used them. But now everybody has the device, and you can be more consistent with the technology rather than, okay, I'm going to plan 3 weeks out to use the computer lab and work it into my lesson. And so now it's a much more fluid environment.
That's really powerful, Rodney, especially the idea of consistency, because we all know that if you do something just once in a while, it becomes just something we do once in a while versus part of the actual instructional design of that classroom and how students should be learning. So I'm totally with you. I'm going to actually, since we were kind of talking about engagement, I'm going to actually turn to you, Dr. Culverhouse. We all know that engagement is key to building understanding. However, any program or innovative method, everything comes down to the teachers who actually implement it and to maximize its impact. So Dr. Culverhouse, what instructional methods have teachers leveraged in Newport News Public Schools in utilizing GBL with their students?
I think the most important thing here to look at is, I don't think you use any one thing in an isolated environment. You need to build it in to the lesson to where it makes sense to put it, and not just say, okay, we got 20 minutes, everybody jump on Legends of Learning and do some games or whatever. You've got to make it meaningful within the lesson and impactful for this, not just the students, but for the teachers as well. So with the ability to track standards in Virginia through Legends of Learning, it's an excellent opportunity to pull a formative assessment out. And, since we're one-to-one, it's a quick 10-minute activity now instead of a whole day ordeal. And so now that, we've maybe halfway through a unit, well, let's see where we're at with the last couple of days lessons, so I can move my teaching in the direction that it needs to go, because we don't want to continue a lesson when only about half of the students are on board. So, we have used it as a big formative assessment piece. Then the teachers can go to the standard-based tracking for the students to see, is the majority understanding the material? Are we lacking here? So where do we move? So not only is it a useful tool to teach, but it's an amazing tool to see where your students are at and what their level of engagement is, for that particular topic, lesson, unit, what have you. And once again, it lends itself right back to that blended learning environment. We can do a lab, we can do a video ed puzzle type deal, and then let's put in, a playlist over 2 or 3 topics. Obviously, you don't want a whole lot of topics, but we want to focus on the main idea is, let's see how the students are doing. And then if they're not performing well, then we reteach, let them play the playlist again, and let's see how much they've grown. So that's kind of where we're seeing a lot of it. But then, and I know most every state has, the state standard test, whatever you call it. And it's a great way, like for our 8th graders, it's a 3-year cumulative test. So, most of us can't remember what we ate for lunch last week, but, we're asking students to remember something from 2 years ago. So it's a good way to spiral back the information for them to see where they're at. How much remediation are we going to have to do for 6th and 7th grade in order for them to be successful on this test? And you can build the playlist, based on the big yield topics, and we can really get a good grasp. And then once again, it works like a formative assessment. I can evaluate the strands and their mastery and move forward from there.
I think what you're doing there in Newport News is actually really powerful. Something that stuck with me personally was the thought that you had that you don't work with anything in isolation. You don't do anything just that one time. And that's something that I think that is really important, is knowing that, GBL isn't the only way to teach. It's one tool in our tool belt that we should be utilizing and with our students as when it is appropriate, when it fits in. At Legends, we created some phenomenal lesson plans, and those lesson plans are purposely just that. They are best practice lessons that focus on, here's where game-based learning can fit within this topic. Here's where it could fit within that topic. I think that's one of the big ahas when we're talking, especially with districts, and as districts are talking with teachers, that this isn't a replacement, but an enhancement, truly. Dr. Nagel?
I totally agree. And it just makes me think of just a lesson that we looked at this week on motion and forces, and how using like game-based, such as Legends of Learning, is a great hook. And, trying to get the students to understand how important that force and motion is, and getting them to, throw the ball and hit the targets, and what does that actually mean? So not only is it a great formative assessment, and to track along the way in a unit or a skill, but also, to grab the student's attention and making them want to do more with that standard or skill.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I'm going to actually turn to a broader question for the entire group before I give Dr. Shaven his lead question here. One of the things that we do know is, whether it's game-based learning or any program, the effectiveness of the program is a lot of times based on the implementation of the program. How you implement it, how you get buy-in, that's a critical part of what we want to truly see. So with that, what have you seen as being effective when you're rolling this out to not just to students, but to teachers, to get their buy-in and get them supporting and utilizing it in effective ways?
For me, it was to get the buy-in. Sometimes you have to let the teachers use the product before they really get buy-in, and you can't just get them buy-in just off of talk, because everything has a great pitch, but when they finally get to implement it and see their student reactions to, a tool, that is how if it's going to be, easy implementation, or if it's going to take a little work from your end to get the student buy-in. And the benefit is with Legends is that they send amazing presenters in to the schools to work with the teachers to allow them time to truly investigate and understand the dynamics of the tool and provide ideas, situations, scenarios of where they could possibly use it.
I think our story is pretty similar. If you think back to the history of how we've engaged here in OPS in Omaha with Legends of Learning, it started with a small group of teachers who happened to start using it, and then that grew, word of mouth grew, and then it became to a point where I had enough teachers saying, hey, I want this. I had to start paying attention, right? And so, but along with that, once we went down a district route, it was a nice partnership in, like it was built into the price, right? Like you have this many times to see whoever might come out or whoever might do a webinar for your teachers. But having that support in the implementation, I think was key. And I would agree with Dr. Culverhouse on kind of how he laid that out.
I agree that support is so important. I know that I can always reach out to them. Especially like last summer with us doing a remote summer school, I needed some parent resources, and we have a very high Hispanic population. I needed a parent video like now, right, to give to my parents so they understood what was Legends of Learning. And they did it for us. I mean, it was wonderful, and it was something that that we needed right at that moment, and to support our parents. And because of that, we were able to pull in those parents, and that they understood the meaning of Legends of Learning, and to actually see games now in Spanish is so powerful for us.
Absolutely. And Dr. Nagel, turning back to you for a second, you mentioned that you started with it in summer school. Could you give us a little bit more background of, you started in summer school, did the same summer school teachers go and teach it in the classroom in that next year? How did that transition from that summer school? Obviously it went remote, but with getting more teachers, because I'm assuming not all your teachers taught summer school.
Right, exactly. And that's why I love summer school, because that's kind of like my playground to try some new and innovative things. And so Legends of Learning was one of those. Once we took it from our summer school teachers, we started to implement it in our junior highs. And then it just kept building from there, and, listening, Legends of Learning, listening to our feedback and what our needs were, and for them to keep building on the programs of what we would like to see, has really now made it something that we can use throughout our district for all of our grade levels.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, Dr. Shaban, question for you here. When teachers and schools are implementing effectively, support is provided for innovation, and when all said and done, we all want to understand what is that impact? Like, we could talk about implementation, which is great. We could talk about how engaged kids are, but I know all of us, as Dr. Culverhouse said earlier, we all have that test at the end of the year that we're held to, and we're all tied to impact. And, what is that? So kind of a question for you. What are some of the biggest impacts you've seen from utilizing a GBL system in your schools, both with your teachers and your students?
Sure, I'm gonna go right off script here, so you had to know this was coming. But in talking with Dr. Nagel and Dr. Culverhouse here, and what you just mentioned, Jonathan, about the end of the year test, another thing came to mind as Dr. Culverhouse was talking, and that's accreditation. And I know what that's like, and I see some colleagues here from Nebraska. Shout out to the Nebraska folks on the call. So we know what that's like here for our accreditation processes, but I'm sure every state has, and every school district has some sort of accreditation. One of the things that we consistently get, I would say, dinged on is technology and technology use. And I'm sort of looking forward to going through our next accreditation process because of what some of the things both my colleagues here were talking about, teachers' comfort level with using game-based learning, but then also it's pervasive now, and it's one of the tools, like Dr. Nichols Culverhouse said, one of the tools, and it's positioned well within. So it's not I think you said going to a computer lab, checking it out. I have to have it 2 weeks in advance. That's not real for educators. And I think anybody on the call would attest, like, you just can't plan that far in advance for this type of in the moment learning. And I think that's what really is provided here. So went off script a little bit, but I couldn't leave that one undone. But getting back to your question about support provided for innovation, that's really, as leaders, what I see us doing, what I feel that we're doing 100% of the time now is just support any way we can. And it's nice to have folks, some Legends of Learning, one of them, who will step alongside you and help implement these initiatives. And the other piece I would say, you know, 'cause the other part of your question was, what's the impact? Well, the impact for me, when I look at my usage reports and I see going from 17 to going to 97% of my middle school teachers using it in 1 year, uh, that's impactful. So then it becomes on us to dig in. Is this product really doing what is it standards based? Is it hitting the standards? And Dr. Culverhouse hit it on a little bit ago, that I can go and look and pull things. My teachers can get together and collaborate and make playlists that are specifically targeted at some of the concepts our kids might be struggling with. All in all, that's really a cool position for us to be in. Even coming from a guy that likes chopper commands. So
No, that's a great point, Chris. You know, the whole idea of impact, you know, we want to see change. We want to see, obviously, increasing of scores, things like that. But when it comes to teachers as well, you know, did you see a change in how they approached, you know, technology over the last year or the last 2 years? Did
yeah,
game-based learning kind of help that shift, if you will?
I think it was well timed, just a coincidence of timing, right? That the teachers were forced into a spot. We were all forced into a spot. You told me I was doing a panel on Zoom 2 years ago, I would have run and hid. You never would have found me. Like, and now it's secondhand. I don't even care that I look funny with my headset on. It's about the ideas, and you get more accustomed to it out of necessity. And I think that happened likewise for our students in our classrooms, our teachers in our classrooms, or wherever they're remote teaching from, to get accustomed to this. But it was a nice timing issue, of coincidence of timing, that we had some really high quality folks out there with game-based learning to help us through that.
Dr. Culverhouse, Dr. Nagel, anything on the impact that you've been seeing, both either with your teachers or with your students?
I feel like with my teachers, they like Dr. Shaban was saying, they really didn't have a choice. I mean, you were virtual or you were virtual. You know, that was pretty much it. And, you know, you can't just sit there day after day just talking at students. And that's a lot of what it is. You're just talking at them. You have to have some other resources in your pocket for you to pull out and to be able to implement to keep their attention. Because, I mean, they're sitting there from 8 o'clock to 3 o'clock on a computer screen. And for us, it was 4 days a week. And if you just sit there and do the same thing over and over, you're going to lose your audience. And I'm hoping that this transfers to the classroom, where you have the instructors that want to stand in front of the class and do the 30 slide PowerPoint and go on for 35, 40 minutes with that. I hope it's changed the mindset that, hey, I don't have to do this for students to learn. They can learn using independent tools that we can bring back in time to the lesson. So I'm not talking, the students are doing the talking, and that's the way they're going to learn.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I think, you know, just to add to that a little bit, you know, what you're saying is, you know, giving those students some choice in what they're going to learn during that asynchronous time. You know, giving them a few different ideas of, you can use this, you can do this, you can do this, you know, and how do you want to best learn or reinforce that standard or skill that you need to be able to know by, you know, by the end of the lesson.
Absolutely. And I heard you all mention, I believe I heard someone mention, you know, utilizing it in centers, game-based learning, utilizing it as flipped classroom. You know, these strategies, I think, as Dr. Culverhouse pointed out early in the conversation, you know, it's not done in isolation. It's not just, here's the time for our video games and that's that time and that's it. I was even thinking back to when I was teaching 4th grade years and years and years ago, you know, walking to the computer room and having to sign out the computer room. And, you know, now it's the access has been such a different point of accessibility now for our teachers and our students, that I think that impact is also happening there in ease of use and in comfort, if you will. I know that I was one who no one would sign out the computer room in my school, so I would continue. I'd be on there every day because I was like, why not? But at the same point, that's not something that we had in the past, and now that access is leading to that comfort level. So with that, I know we're at about 35 minutes in here. I have a few more questions, but I wanted to turn it over to our audience. I know that our audience might have a few questions that they have for you all about game-based learning. If you are in the audience and you have a question for our panelists, if you'll put it in the chat, we will make sure to bring that question up. So please, this is your time to grill these folks on what they're doing with game-based learning in their districts and schools. While I wait for our first question to come in, I'll ask one of my follow-up ones here. Knowing that you've all incorporated this game-based learning into your curriculums, first with summer school and then into the full curriculum, or with a few teachers into across middle schools, how can or have you seen GBL support STEM skills? Anyone want to tackle that one?
The critical thinking piece, I think is the major component there, because it's a scenario and you have to use the strategy and critical thinking skills in order to move not only the game part, but then the content part that you have to, be able to be strong enough in, which hopefully will encourage students to maybe pay attention more, because they want to be more successful. If not, they're going to have to do research, and research is a huge part of STEM in order to be successful. So I think it kind of ties together in that regard.
I think I'll add on to that. I think you have a host of great presenters there, Jonathan, with you on your team at Legends of Learning, and borrowing from one of them early on. I have to see them speak. I can't remember who it was, so sorry I'm missing the props, but it gives students an opportunity to fail and have a common shared experience of failure, but failing forward, right? And so when you talk about STEM and engineers and all of that, and we know that we're lacking multiple different folks in that field. It's not represented well in engineering across diversity. Having an opportunity to fail forward and understand that that's part of the game. It's part of learning. It's part of life. It's part of where we're heading. Is an amazing experience, and I think that we shouldn't discount that. We should say, hey, here's one valuable part of this type of learning. So I just throw that out there. It says, with engineering design particularly, it's not something that 20 years ago I thought much about when I was looking at my standards here in Omaha. But I think now our teachers are, and they're struggling with it, and they have a little bit of help here with that type of learning.
That's great. That is great. And I think you're spot on. I don't know about you, but I don't sit down in front of a video game and think I'm going to beat it the very first time I turn it on. So I think Mario Brothers purposely taught us the importance of failing and trying again. So, and I think the video game industry made the arcade machine just for failure so that you could put another quarter in and they could make a little bit more money. So I'm with you. Teaching students that failure piece and the determination and the grit. I always like to say that no student ever asks for a second worksheet, but they'll ask for another game to play. So we have a few questions that have come up here. I have a question here from one of our participants that says, we use Legends of Learning in 6 of our middle schools. One of the schools that piloted the program prior to purchasing is still the highest user. Unfortunately, other buildings are lagging. Any advice on how to entice more people to try and incorporate this into their experiences? Yes, Dr. Nagel.
So what we did, we actually just did this in the spring because we were seeing some of the same things, that some of the junior highs weren't using it as much as the others. And so this spring, our math department created a competition. And so when we created that competition within a time frame and really PR'd it up and made it a fun event, and then we literally surprised the principal with a traveling trophy and balloons, if they won, and really made it a celebration. And so that did help increase our numbers. We had users that have never tried it before were on and trying because we turned it into a competition.
I can't argue with competitions.
That was it's a little different than a story here. It was sort of orchestrated word of mouth, as how I would say it happened here. And by that, I mean, we had very little time dedicated for professional learning that I had control over, maybe 6 to 9 hours, which I assume isn't like many of my colleagues here. But every curriculum day for a couple years, I would have at least a 45-minute, somebody there to check in from Legends of Learning. And it was level specific, right? So grade level specific. So I didn't have to feel weird if I'm teaching 6th grade. I'm not going to be sitting next to an 8th grade teacher that doesn't know my content. It's just for the 6th grade group. It's just for the 7th grade group, just for the 8th grade group. And then in working with the trainers, we also advertise the sessions to be like, here's an Uber user session. Somebody just wants to know the next trick and tip. And here's somebody that's a session for someone that's never opened it before, doesn't know how to log in. So we were explicit in a couple ways there, but just providing that opportunity. And then over time, our teachers just came to it without the competition. But I like the idea, Dr. Nagel.
Absolutely. Another follow-up to that was also that they've seen that high usage doesn't necessarily mean best usage. I think we could say that about almost anything. So what in your mind is optimal usage with your students and teachers?
I don't think there's an actual number there because, every classroom has a different dynamic. And you have to read your students to know what works most effectively for them. And it may go class to class as to how that looks. But the important thing is it meaningful when it's placed in the lesson? And once again, are we just saying, okay, your homework assignment is to do these playlists, or I'm tired of talking, so we're going to give them a playlist. We have to make it meaningful, and there has to be follow-up. If a student is continually doing assignments and the teacher never goes back and follows up with what they've done, students are think it has to be more meaningful and impactful within the lesson for them to increase their usage and make it more specific.
I couldn't agree more. I could not agree more. Dr. Shaban?
Yeah, I would just add, I would say yes and on that one. Consider something analogous might be videotapes. Well, you don't want your teachers using videotapes from end to end, like the number of the quality, number of hours that they're using it isn't the important point. I would agree right there. That it's really about the quality of the experience. Is it steeped in standards? Is it something we can look back to and say, here's where we need to grow. Here's a playlist that can help. I want you to go through this instead of just, like I said, playing a videotape.
So the follow up to that, Dr. Shaban, could you explain what a videotape is?
Yeah, back when we had Chopper Command running around.
I was going to say, same time you had Atari.
Yeah, yes. 100%.
Yeah. No, I think
that, or Betamax.
I would let that go.
I'd have to totally agree with you, though. That with both of you, another great example is thinking about even eating something. You could eat something very healthy like carrots nonstop, but you don't want to eat all carrots. And if you eat too many carrots, you're going to get sick of carrots, and they're not going to be worth. It's what really is how you're utilizing it and how the teacher's doing it too. As Dr. Culverhouse said, how they're utilizing it to actually have an impactful, meaningful experience. It shouldn't just be, well, hey, it's Friday, it's game-based learning time. Well, I know it doesn't really fit with what we're doing, but let's do it anyways. I think that's a key piece. Dr. Nagel, do you have something to add in?
I just think, that just brings me back to the why. Why are you using that tool? And if the why doesn't match your outcome of what you want from those students, then maybe that's not the right tool to use at that time.
Spot on. Absolutely agree. Another question that we had came in is this one, which is, while thinking about game-based learning, educational resources, student agency, and how they learn, how have you seen today's students change in the recent months? Specifically, especially as you go back to some of you having in-person school or a hybrid model, how have you seen the students change after that dynamic change?
I think it's too early for us. We just started school Tuesday. So we're just getting into the flow of things, but it's awkward silence in the classrooms right now, which is very different. So, but we'll see. Like I said, jury's still out right now.
Yeah. Well, hang on. The silence will be broken. We're a little further ahead with our kiddos getting back to school. But I would say, just like with many other things, students are more resilient than the adults, right? And so they're going to probably be adjusting more quickly to the reality, whatever that reality is, than we do. So just throwing that out there as far as how students are responding now post, or I don't know what you call it, reintroduction to schooling. Yeah. I
agree. Dr. Nagel?
Well, talking about reintroduction, besides, like our kindergartners, some of them haven't had preschool. So, we have some larger gaps there. We have first graders that have never been inside a building. We have second graders that had half a year in a building. So you have all these, instructional gaps right now, and social emotional needs that need to be met. So we've been focusing on that. We were given some time, thanks to Illinois, to just work on that first before we dove into academics. So this is our first part of academics. And when I go around to the schools that I've seen, we're moving. We're seeing lots of writing, which I'm so excited about. We're seeing those kids being able just to pick up and be part of the community.
Fantastic. No, that's great to hear. That's what we really want to hear across the nation is our students really coming back and seeing those positive things that we weren't able to see in person over the last year and a half. So it looks like we're out of questions from our audience. I have one more that I'm going to end with here, as I think it's one of the most important questions when we're talking about instructional resources and usage of different types of instruction, which is, you all have been implementing game-based learning for a good amount of time now. What are you hearing from students? Forget our teachers. We know our teachers are going to do whatever we're told, but what are we hearing from students when it comes to game-based learning and utilizing that, and whether it's in classroom or out of classroom? Anyone want to jump in?
I can start with what the data tells me. The students in my district are speaking with the data, and that is the amount of games played. And there's a nice report that shows teacher initiated versus student initiated games, and the kids are coming to it. They're not just one or two, they're coming in droves to the product. And so for me, that tells me that the students are ready to go down a road of learning and have a good time with it. So that's my take. And it's just based on the data. I haven't had a one-to-one conversation with the student other than my own children.
I would concur also that, the students seem to be craving it at times. And of course, you've always got the students who aren't gamers at all. And then you've got those that are at the extreme. So, I think once they all get into it and they see the other ones in the class are doing it, and, like Dr. Nagel was saying, make competitions and things like that. I think they become more encouraged when they're able to compete a little bit, maybe. But the times I've been in classrooms and they're using it, the students were highly engaged. There wasn't a lot of side conversations unless they were talking about the game, so when you have gamers, instead of headsets in different places, they're beside each other and they, will talk to each other about what's going on. So I have witnessed that part.
I love it. I love it.
I will share one of the experiences this summer. We had remote summer school this year, and I was watching a class, and I was asking one of the children, what they thought about that lesson at the time, and she was stuck. She just could not get through it. And one of her classmates said, I'll help you with it. And I just thought that was just great, that even in a virtual setting, and they're not in a true classroom, that they were still willing to help each other with, the game-based lesson.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Well, as we continue to look to support students, teachers, and our communities during the school year, GBL and the lessons learned from collaborating with our colleagues today can provide teachers the tools they need to help their students be successful now and into the future. We encourage you to reach out to our panelists with additional questions or want to hear more about their experiences, and connect with any of your Legends of Learning reps about how we can help engage your students and grow content understanding today. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, and we hope you have a great start to your school year. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.